I'm in my early 20s, so when I was a kid, CDs were already on their way out. But they were still a pretty popular way to listen to music. Streaming services didn't exist yet, and illegally downloading music was not something every 9-year-old knew how to do. At least I didn't. Plus, I've always been into collecting the things I like, whether it was Lego, plastic dinosaurs, or music. So when I got into music in my early teens, I bought a lot of CDs. The vinyl revival hadn't taken off yet, and CDs were still readily available. Prices were dropping significantly every year. Nowadays, I mostly stream music or buy records, because streaming is just really cheap and convenient, and I love the big artwork and retro aesthetic of vinyl. But I still own a few hundred of these fuckers, and I still play them on a regular basis. And maybe it's because my love for music started with CDs, but to be honest, they still have a special place in my heart. So here it is, an ode to CDs. CDs, or compact discs, were invented by Philips and first released in 1982. Throughout the 80s and 90s, they were the most popular audio format available. But around the turn of the century, CD sales started declining because of the rise of digital downloading. Nowadays, CDs are looked at as really outdated and uncool, but back then they were marketed as the greatest human invention since electricity or the wheel or whatever. And though they were not that revolutionary, they did have some cool features that set them apart from other music formats at the time, like the skip button, the sleek design, and the fact that an average CD can store 80 minutes of music, while a 12-inch LP can only store about 22 minutes per side before the audio quality goes to shit. But most importantly, CDs have a very clear sound. Because nowadays we may romanticize the sound of a dusty record or the tape hiss of a cassette, but back then those things were mostly seen as annoyances. Because in the 70s and early 80s, records and cassettes were not the cool retro alternative to streaming that they are now. They were the norm. So when CDs came around, people were happy that they could finally listen to music without any surface noise and play an album over and over again without having to clean the record or rewind the tape with a pencil or something. CDs have the sound quality of a vinyl record and the convenience of a cassette tape. That's why many people back then sold their whole record collection and ran to the store to replace them with CDs. Which is really strange considering that not even 30 years later, kids are trading in stacks of CDs to buy 1 or 2 vinyl records. I mean, these things are pretty much worthless right now. And there's a reason for that. Because back in the 2000s, people who still bought CDs always used the argument that CDs had a better sound quality than digital downloads. And they were absolutely right, because the sound quality of most digital downloads back then absolutely sucked. And though most people will always take convenience over sound quality, CDs still had a use to people who didn't. But we live in the age of streaming now, where listening to music is easier than ever before, and the sound quality is actually pretty nice. Some audiophiles and record store clerks may tell you that Spotify and Apple Music sound horrible compared to physical media, but as someone who's been collecting CDs and vinyl for years, I can say that if you get a good speaker or a nice pair of headphones, the sound quality of these streaming services isn't all that bad, especially compared to the crappy MP3 downloads people listened to 10 years ago. But still, I think a CD and physical media in general has some advantages to streaming. First, you can support the artists you like, because streaming services are paying artists about 1/3 of a cent per stream. And I know someone like Kendrick or Drake doesn't need your money to make ends meet, but if you listen to a lot of smaller, more independent artists, buying a physical copy of their music is a great way to support them. Besides that, you also build more of a connection with the music you like. I'm not saying that you're not a real music fan if you don't buy physical media, but in my experience an album simply becomes more important to you when you know you've spent 10 or 20 bucks on it. Money you could have also spent on clothes, food, weed or whatever. The album is now part of your collection. It's a tangible object, not something you can delete with the click of a button when your phone's storage is full. You may not listen to the album for a while, but you'll probably return to it from time to time. Because the iPod I had when I was 13 is long gone by now. But I still own most of the CDs I bought back then. And that's the most important thing about physical media to me. You build up a collection of music you love. Music you've gathered through years of going to record stores and talking to people, while creating a lot of great memories in the process. You don't get that with your iTunes library or Spotify playlist. But if you want to buy a physical copy of the music, why buy one of those plastic, cheap-looking CDs when you could buy a cool, sexy piece of vinyl? Well, I think CDs are kind of an overlooked midway between vinyl and streaming. 1. CDs are really fucking cheap right now. Most vinyl records cost 20 to 30 bucks, while most CDs cost less than 10. And you can also find a lot of great CDs for less than $1 at your local thrift store. And you don't even have to worry about the condition they're in, because of reason number 2. CDs are a lot less fragile than vinyl records. Sure, a CD can get scratched and the song will skip a little, but before that happens, the CD has to be seriously damaged, while a vinyl record is almost unplayable after a few scratches or dirty fingerprints. Third, they're more practical. I understand that a lot of the impracticalities of vinyl contribute to its human aesthetic, but I also like listening to an album without having to turn over the record halfway through, or let someone hear a certain song without having to clumsily put the needle in the right groove. CDs are simple and reliable, and I like that. But the main reason I think they're still used for CDs in 2018 is that most music from the 90s and early 2000s will probably sound best on CD. Albums from that era are not originally mixed and mastered for Spotify or vinyl, because Spotify didn't exist yet and vinyl was considered dead at that point. So if you want to hear those albums how they were meant to be heard, you should listen to them on CD. Plus there's still a lot of great music out there on CD, some of which is not even available on streaming or vinyl. And don't get me wrong, I love the vinyl revival. I think it's great that a lot of people from my generation who grew up with the convenience of digital downloads and streaming are appreciating the beauty of vinyl records. But let's be honest, the whole thing is mostly fueled by kids being weirdly nostalgic for a time they didn't live. Right now, vinyl's back and CDs are totally uncool. But mark my words, within 10 years or so, CDs will make a comeback too. Because if the undependable drunk known as the cassette tape can have a modest revival, I don't see why CDs can't.